Chapter 18. A Submarine Prisoner. Nancy struggled, but could not free herself or see her captor as she was pushed toward the shack. A cloth had been tied over her mouth. Once inside the dilapidated building, she blinked in astonished disbelief. Jean Holmes stood peering into what looked like a cellar. Gil Gary, the gardener, was holding open a trap door to the opening. Jean and Gil stared at Nancy and her captor. "Well, Nancy Drew, the detective," Jean's voice was no longer shy, but strident. "Where did you find her, Frank?" "Spying, was she?" Gil added. "She sure was," said the man called Frank. The young detective observed that he was about 50 years old and of medium build. His hair was cropped close. Suddenly Nancy realized that he must be the boatman with the crew cut whom Helen had seen, and also the fisherman on the river she herself had questioned. She recognized his nasal voice. But Jean? Nancy was astounded. What was this trio up to? Obviously something underhanded. Was Gay, alias Mary Mason, in league with them? And how did the miniature submarine fit into their scheme? Frank maintained a tight grip on Nancy's arm. "Guess you won't go skin diving for a while," he gave a harsh laugh. "You bet," Jean spoke up, her eyes gleaming coldly. Nancy noticed the girl no longer wore glasses. "We'll see to that. Nancy Drew won't ever get a chance to reveal our scheme." Gil nodded. "We've got to clear out pronto and take her with us. The shipment's aboard the boat. Everything's cleaned out of here." The three accomplices held a whispered consultation. Before Nancy had time for further analysis, Gil looked at his watch. "We've got to step on it. Simon will be worried." "See you there," Jean said to Nancy slyly. "Try to figure this one out, Miss Private Eye." At these words, Frank gave Nancy a shove and dragged her to the river. The man in skin diving gear was waiting. Nancy struggled to get away, but to no avail. To her horror, the skin diver forced her into the back seat of the miniature submarine and tied her securely. She had a glimpse of Frank, Gil, and Jean boarding a motorboat hidden in a nearby cove. Then the skin diver shut the transparent hatch, and the sub began to descend. "How am I ever going to escape?" A wave of terror swept over the young sleuth. As the submarine plunged downward, Nancy told herself sternly, "I must keep cool." She noticed that the skin diver remained in front with another man who was piloting the craft. "There are two more members of the gang," Nancy thought. "I wonder who Simon is, and what kind of shipment is on the boat Gil mentioned. Are we heading there now?" The navigator was steering forward, using a simple control stick and automatic pedals. He and the frogman kept their backs turned to Nancy. Were these men enemy agents or smugglers? Perhaps Emily's diamonds were part of the mysterious shipment. Nancy thought about the rocky overhang under which the shark-nosed sub had been hidden. "I suppose Frank was the lookout," she conjectured, "and Gil probably went to meet him in a canoe from the inn." She concluded that the skin diver had probably thrown the spear at her, either to get rid of me for good or scare me away, and it was probably this sub that caused Helen and me to capsize in the canoe. It occurred to Nancy that even if she learned the answers to all her questions, it might do her no good. Escape seemed impossible. She realized that none of her friends, her father, or the police would have the slightest idea where she was. Then a faint hope came to her. Carl Bard had seen her leave the inn. "If only they think to search the river," Nancy thought worriedly. Trying to forget her fears, the young sleuth concentrated on the two scheming waitresses. Mary, doubtless a disguise of Gay Moreau, and Jean Holmes, who... It's fantastic, but if Gay can impersonate me and pose as Mary, why couldn't she be Jean Holmes? Nancy was sure the actress could easily play any role, plus being gay herself. Gay, beautiful, but that's a word I haven't heard. Avaricious? Avaricious. Might have to look that one up. Easygoing, flighty, merry, and shy, plain Jean. Gay, familiar with the inn, had disguised herself as Mary. She could have been the ghost, sometimes as a Titian blonde, at others wearing a dark wig. As part of the scare operation, she had left, using the excuse of the place being haunted. Then she had come back in another disguise, as Jean Holmes. Gay as Mary could easily have overheard Mrs. Willoughby describing Emily's 20 diamonds and also telling Maud the planned date of presentation. Then Mary bought the substitutes. She had slipped into the hidden closet without being seen and committed the theft. The speculation brought Nancy back to the present. Had Frank and the men on the sub helped with the diamond robbery? Was the cellar in the river shack being used to hide stolen goods to be taken away later in the sub? Would the answer to these questions explain the other mysterious events, including the time bomb and the vibrations at the inn, all done to scare people away from the place? It seemed to be the young sleuth that ages had gone by since her capture, but now the sub slowly ascended to the surface. Nancy heard the navigator say that something was wrong with the mechanism. As he steered toward a small cabin cruiser a few hundred feet away, Nancy saw that they were on an isolated section of the Muskoka River. The sub stopped alongside the cruiser, and the pilot opened the hatch. He untied Nancy from the seat and helped her mount a small ladder to the deck of the cruiser. Awaiting them were Jean Holmes, Gil Gary, and Frank. Jean laughed triumphantly. "Well, have a nice trip?" she taunted Nancy. Unable to speak and guarded closely by Gil and Frank, holding flashlights, Nancy gave her a disgusted look. She scanned the river for other nearby craft. There were none. If only a river police patrol boat would come by. But none did. Meanwhile, the skin diver and pilot had hitched the miniature submarine to the stern of the cruiser. As the diver took off his face mask, Nancy saw that he was dark, wiry, and had an impassive expression. Jean gestured toward the pilot, a stocky man of about 30. "This is my brother-in-law, Bud," she smirked, as Gil tied Nancy's arms behind her back, then bound her legs together with a stout rope. "I couldn't introduce you when you visited my sister in Dockville. She did a good job of being Mary Mason, eh, Nancy?" Nancy's theory about 2 Mary Masons was correct. Also, it was now apparent that Gay Moreau had assumed her brother-in-law's last name for her first Lilac Inn disguise. The next moment, Nancy was thrust violently forward through the door of a small cabin. She fell to the floor, and the door was slammed behind her. Simultaneously, the cruiser's engine churned and the boat began moving. Despair engulfed Nancy. Meanwhile, back in River Heights, Chief McGinnis had just received a phone call from the Dockville chief. He reported that the house Nancy had visited was empty. Neighbors had said that the 3 occupants, a husband and wife and a woman relative, had rented the house. They had been quiet and kept to themselves. One woman neighbor had mentioned, however, that occasionally she heard hammering and drilling noises coming from the basement of the house. The police sergeant had checked and discovered some electronic equipment in the cellar, along with several books on navigation and skin diving. "But we found a real prize in the garage," the sergeant added. "The stolen truck that almost ran into Miss Drew. We're keeping a stakeout on the house." Chief McGinnis had just hung up when a call came in from Carson Drew. "Chief," the lawyer said tersely, "have you heard from Nancy?" "Not since this afternoon. Why?" The lawyer explained that he had just returned home and telephoned the inn. He had learned from Miss Willoughby that Nancy had been missing for several hours. Everyone, including the state police, are out looking for her. Nancy's convertible is still in the parking lot. Her canoe and diving equipment are still there. I don't like this at all, Carson Drew went on gravely. I understand my daughter called you after talking with some actress who gave her a clue to the person who's been posing as Nancy. Yes, Nancy thinks her impersonator is an actress with a prison record. Her name is Gay Moreau. Gay Moreau! Carson Drew exclaimed. Chief, if that girl's responsible for Nancy's disappearance, my daughter is in great danger. Until next time.